most of human history, people have parented the way their parents and grandparents did, with culture providing the cues. We call this Parenting 1.0.
For various reasons, parents began to question these approaches, and we started turning more and more to so-called experts to learn to parent. This was the beginning of Parenting 2.0. This allowed for some real advances, but also a lot of confusion as we got further and further away from our natural parenting instincts.
Parenting 3.0 is about reclaiming those instincts and integrating them with our current understanding of child development. It brings together the wisdom of the past with the best scientific and psychological research of the present.
Parenting 3.0 isn't a fad or a quick fix. It's a set of principles that allows us to engage with our kids and life from an informed and empowered place.
I'm Jai Flicker.
And I'm Deb Blum.
Welcome to Parenting 3.0.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is part 4 of our attachment series, and we are going to be talking today about the loving alpha. The idea that to have a healthy and effective relationship, and even a more enjoyable relationship, enjoyable time at parenting, we need to have a hierarchical relationship with our children. So that's what we're going to dive deep into today, and we hope you love it.
So right before we started recording, you started saying something, and I said, I don't know what it is, so I'm curious. And I thought I could just feel like this might be a good way to open up our conversation. So here we go.
What I was going to say is that I actually feel moved to tears in some ways that I think alpha might be the biggest, most important thing that parents can understand. And I think I'm moved to tears for multiple reasons. And I think one of them is because some part of my being just so knows that this is what our children need. And that they're craving this. And I don't know, I feel like there's something, I just want to say that alpha, stick with us if you're having any reaction to the word alpha, just because it's so much more than maybe what your thoughts are of alpha. You know, I know for me, it was, the word maybe gave me a little reaction or rubbed me the wrong way in the beginning. Though it doesn't at all right now. Like, I feel like I've done a lot of reading and research about alpha, not just as it relates to attachment theory, but just like alpha male or alpha female. And I've lost the charge that I had in the past around it. Okay, but the second thing is that I think that the parents need it. Like, I think it's like the ticket to feeling like we are empowered, to feeling like we're not lost in this parenting path. And I know that we can take anything like and take it too far. And I know that there are probably people who associate alpha with like domineering and overpowering and controlling, and that is absolutely like, you know, legitimate, that you could, an unhealthy alpha maybe could go in that direction. But that's not what this is. And I guess when I was just thinking about us starting this conversation and thinking that, why is it so meaningful for me? Like, why was I so, it's like, I almost feel like there's a way that I'm feeling just this seriousness around it. Like, it's so important for people to understand alpha and how much it can really change an entire family. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was, you know, and
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to give us permission that we are going to be talking about alpha for the duration of speaking on this podcast, it's going to get weaved in many
sure.
ways. So I don't want us to feel like, oh, we have to get it exactly right now and make complete sense of it. I kind of hope in the future that we're taking examples of like something that a family would be dealing with, and then applying attachment theory, including the alpha, to that, so that it'll make more sense. So right now we might be a little bit in theory, but then we might move it into some real practical examples over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think? Are you kind of thinking was that completely not what you expected me to say?
I had no expectation, but I totally agree. I totally agree. And I love that you're putting that level of kind of heartfelt emphasis on it, because the reality is, like, almost basically when parenting goes awry, when the parent-child relationship gets out of whack, it's almost always related to this phenomenon of the alpha and losing that sort of position or that sort of dynamic with your child. And I know this myself, both theoretically as an educator, but also as the parent of a 2.25-year-old. And it can feel really difficult to know in all these different situations how to regain the alpha. But when I do, I'm always just blown away by, oh, that was it again, and how helpful it is, and how at ease it puts my daughter, and how much more she listens, and how much more she follows my lead, and how much more settled she is when I really inhabit that. So let's definitely do our best here to connect it to real things, so that it's not just theoretical, but knowing that it's, this stuff takes time to understand, and so over many episodes we'll continue to ground it. Yeah,
sounds perfect.
Yeah. So let me just offer a few initial thoughts. Let's just kind of start sketching what it even is, okay?
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to go right to there's two things that made me bristle about the alpha. One was the name, as you mentioned, because it does sound so kind of macho, alpha, Okay, so that made me bristle. And then the next thing that made me bristle was that Neufeld, who's this like total heart-centered psychologist who cares so much about, kids, and has devoted his life to helping parents and educators and therapists be more effective, he said that the attachment relationship is hierarchical. And I was like, what? And he called it a dirty word. He said, I'm going to use it. It's a dirty word, and especially in these parts, because he was local when in person when he presented that, and I first heard it. But the more I thought about it, and it has lost its charge for me too, is that I came to the understanding that we all need and want people to look up to. Like, the easiest person for me is the Dalai Lama. He comes to mind. It's like, I look up to him. Mm-hmm. And you can, in the very language itself, is a directional, if you want to call it that, hierarchical implication of looking up to. And I think hierarchy has some real downsides, of course, and in particular, a dominator hierarchy, a hierarchy of power and oppression, is obviously going to be harmful. But there are other types of hierarchies that are not that, and this is one of them: the parent-child relationship. It needs to be hierarchical, and there's a very simple reason for that, and that is when the child feels that they are in a hierarchical relationship and they're in the dependent position of that hierarchy, they feel on a very cellular, basic level that there's someone there who knows what's going on, who's got it covered, who's keeping them safe, who's pointing them in a healthy, good direction, so they don't have to worry about it. And so then they can relax and trust that and be at ease. And so
be a child.
And be a child.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the sense in which the alpha is hierarchical. And I think I was going to make this point earlier. It's like, but because we have rejected in many circles, in many cultural circles, we have rejected the idea, for good reason, of hierarchy. We've if you don't have that in place, you kind of lose, in a conscious way, this valuing of those who do have more expertise, who do have more experience, who do have more wisdom, and to acknowledge, like, hey, you know what? Yeah, there are some real, true leaders out in the world, and I do look up to them, and I do want to follow their lead, even as an adult. Is that's like, it's kind of a taboo thing to even say, because it implies this, like, better than, and that's not really what it's about. It's like, and it's such a common thing of, like, any skill you want to learn, you're going to go to someone who knows more about that particular thing. It doesn't make them
right.
inherently better as a person, but it does mean that, why would you go to them if they weren't better at that thing? And so
right.
So this is the nuance that we're trying to get at here.
Right. And in this case, it's maybe even, I have so many thoughts on this. So for one, while I do think that there are people who will bristle at the idea of hierarchy, I think there are also a lot of people who don't bristle at the idea of hierarchy and very much value hierarchy and see that is actually, in many ways, the way that people can be very successful, even in the workplace. Because there are people who do know more, and they actually do need to provide more direction to people at other levels in the organization. And that there's some people who might say hierarchy is a dirty word, and some people who actually really don't see it that way. So I just want to say, I don't want to just, like, across the board be saying
great
it's
point.
not, because some people believe very much in the hierarchical relationship between a parent and a child in the way of, like, I am the boss and I know better than you know, and it can be this a more oppressive kind of a situation, but they still value it. So it's sort of like differentiating that alpha's not that. And but that we're also not advocating for just complete, like, flat parent-child reciprocal bi-directional peer-to-peer relationship. So, and the difference is, rather than them being better than, it's it's that the parent actually it's just biology. It's just a fact that our children are born completely dependent on us, and that is something different about human babies compared to other babies. Even if you look at, I think, like the horse, like the baby's born and the just kind of trots away, and that's not something that happens with humans. And in fact, now we're talking about 26-year-olds, like, that's when you're finally mature, right? You have like a mature brain.
And so gelled.
Right. And so what that means is it's probably, like, if we could even take out this idea that someone knows more or is better than, it's like, it's different. It's literally necessity. Our children they must have someone who takes care of their dependency needs.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's
so
right. Yeah.
it comes from that. And so it's when we get confused about that and we start to think that like we need to be watching for the moment when our child needs to be, independent, or we need to be fostering independence in them, or we start to look at them and we lose sight of that our role, and I say role, and then in my head I'm like,
there's two meanings to that word.
Right.
There's two meanings to the word role. Maybe.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, please do.
So one is like a role, and it's sort of like a traditional sense of the word, where it's like you have these preconceived notions of what a parent should be, and then you're just acting to fulfill that role, whether you feel aligned with that or not, whether that seems to be working. It's a fixed role with a set of ideas and responsibilities. And the sense that we're meaning in is sort of, it's harder to articulate. It's not about a fixed preconceived notion. It's about inhabiting a particular dynamic and a particular stance. It's sort of like there is a very big quality to leadership if you talk about in the workplace. The word leadership is like being a true leader is maps onto the alpha pretty well. And you can have a title, a job title. You could be a director or a manager or a whatever, an executive. But having that title and going through sort of the motions of behaving as that a director is supposed to behave doesn't make you a true leader. And I think that's the same way. So when we're talking about the role of the alpha, we're not talking about fulfilling some outer sort of some it's hard
like
to even
an
put
expectation.
Sure,
Is that what you mean?
yeah,
It's not. It's like it comes more from this place of within. You said this before and you just said it again, but I think it's an inhabiting of the alpha that is actually inherently in us. And by the way, it's not, there's a researcher that did a TED talk on this that I'll put in the show notes, but that is, I can't remember his name, but he talks about demystifying the alpha. And it turns out that he had done studies on the alpha in primates that got misrepresented in some ways. And so he was trying to clarify what his studies and his research actually came up with. But by the way, there's an alpha female and an alpha male. And in primates, there's only one alpha female and one alpha male. And it turns out, though, that it's far more complex. It's not what people think about, like the chest beating, sort of like macho. That's not really what it is. And actually, if you think about an alpha, usually an alpha in those types of settings rises to the top because of their generosity and their ability to create harmony in the, what is it called? Like in the family, but that's not really what it's called. In the troop. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That sounds right. And then there's a way that they are so remarkably good at holding the needs of their what did you just say again?
Your troop.
Yeah, their troop. It's not a word that I'm really familiar with, but it seems, yeah, their troop, and they are really, it's actually coming from the place of like meeting the needs of the people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't actually come from the sort of distorted view of the alpha that is out there in the world right now. And you look at alpha male and you have all those negative connotations. And so when I think about it from that perspective, and I see it from the perspective of someone who's actually holding the space for and, caring about a community, to me, that's more what this feels like. It's like the parent who's there saying like, I've got this covered.
Yeah. 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 I think maybe the distinction here is also one of sort of status. If we think of, high status and status seeking individuals, that's a kind of an ego based, selfish endeavor. And it has its place. I mean, that's just a reality that we're all embedded within. It's part of society and part of human interactions. But the goal of, or the role in the positive sense of the alpha is to provide. It's actually, in its ideal form, it's totally selfless.
Yeah.
And actually, if we are kind of balking at something our child says because it offends us, and we get reactive because we feel like they're challenging our authority, that's actually a trap where we're losing the alpha, not standing up for it. So this is why it's complex. There's a lot to sort of both explain what it is and to kind of, in the same way, to demystify.
Yeah.
To kind of explain away, hopefully, some of the misunderstandings that are likely to occur, even not because people have heard the wrong thing about the alpha, because most of us haven't heard of the alpha until we do, of course, but it's because of all the cultural associations with other things that aren't related to parenting that get brought up in the process.
Yeah, well, because there's this whole thing of like, I know one of the things that I've learned is, the concept of power over, and this idea that we don't want to power over people. And that's, that's when hierarchies start to go wrong, is when we have people who are abusing their power and or misusing their power, and they are no longer thinking about how they're holding the organization, if you will, with care. They're sort of maybe
the community or the family,
right? Yeah. And they've lost their way in some way. So for me, this has been a deep exploration into a much how to find nuance in power. Like it's not really power over, and yet you are in a parent-child relationship. You are bigger, and you are more. You do know more, and you can take care of them. And so it's really holding that with a lot of care, and with great responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, and that's the real key to it, is to almost be vigilant about that you could hurt this child at any given moment, that you have the power. Your words, your behaviors, everything you do has the power to hurt them. And so it's becoming aware of that power, and then holding it with such tenderness to know that, I actually don't ever want to misuse this power. I don't ever want to abuse the power that I have over my child. I want to have deep reverence for that. And that's how I look at the alpha.
Love it. Oh my God, I have so many things bursting in my head right now, and I'm going to try to capture some of them. One is that there's a way in which, because there's one people know that as once you become a parent, that whether you acknowledge it consciously or not, that you have power over your child, or you have this. There is at the very least a power differential there, right?
Yeah,
there is a power differential, and so if we have a very kind of one-sided and negative view of power, then one possible response is to sort of reject that power and sort of abdicate the power. And it's an understandable move, but it is a disastrous one, because we need that power in order to parent. So, but not in the dominating way, not in a power over. I think maybe to contrast power over, we say power in the service of. And so but because it does take a fair amount of responsibility, it takes what I was thinking as you were talking is that it takes the more responsibility you have, that you take on and that you can wield, the more power you can safely use and have it be actually in service of. Mm-hmm. And so I almost feel like, and I'm trying to think if I actually consciously did this or not, but I feel like part of my journey has been to, in my own little world, earn my power with myself, right? Where I have worked hard to be skillful in my interactions. This has been mostly over my 20 years as an educator, and now it's translating to my relationship with my daughter as a parent. It's like the more responsible I know I am, the more I can trust myself with that power. And then the more power I'm able to harness to be in service of their well-being, their growth, their maturity, their healing, and their thriving. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the alpha.
I love it. And you know what it makes me think about, though? I gotta say, this is so wild because it's so easy to, as the kids get older, think that you no longer need to do that for them. And you work with high schoolers, and I'm raising 2 teenagers. And so we're talking about that, like, this is actually something we hold even when I think it's easier. We look at our kids and maybe they're back talking, or maybe they're trying to act independent and they're not doing the things we want them to do. And there's these things happening, and we may think, oh, yeah, like I just don't need to do it. Like, clearly they don't need me anymore. And we sort of maybe throw our hands up in the air, and we don't know really how to step in anymore. Because, like, when you look at a tiny little baby, it is so obvious that we need to take care of them. It's so obvious the little baby is not going to feed itself, and it needs to be held, and it's so clear. But as they get older and they start acting in their own ways that maybe look like they don't need you anymore, it's so easy to be tricked by that and think you no longer need to be in that alpha role, or they no longer need you to be in that alpha role, and when it's not true.
It's so not true. They need it maybe even more because they're getting it less. Right? It's most babies are getting a lot of attention, even if it's kind of, I don't know, regardless of the quality of that attention. It's sort of like, it's pretty obvious. You just gotta feed them and change their diaper and like hold them if they're crying, and try something. It's hard to not attend to a crying baby. Right.
And even like a stranger would attend to a crying baby if needed. Right. So everyone's kind of watching out for the babies.
But teens, people go, oh, you work with teens? Oh God.
Yeah.
It's like people are afraid of teens for good reason. I mean, I get it. It's so not my experience that it's, I kind of don't get it at the same time. I get it intellectually, but I think the thing is, and this comes from someone named Dr. Thomas Gordon, not to be confused with Gordon Neufeld, and he wrote a book and created a whole training program called the Parent Effectiveness Training, which is pretty helpful actually. He says that the reason that adolescents seem to be really rebellious is that they've been resisting all along inside, but it's just that as they mature, they get that power to push back finally. And so that really struck me because a lot of times we kind of have this view of teens that they're very kind of disrespectful, and some are, right? But it's like it points to the fact that there may be this deeper problem, and I think there is, that the dynamic is off, and it's just that we as parents can get away with it for a long time until finally it hits adolescence, and then all of a sudden we get all this pushback. And so it kind of, the implication is, the sooner we can make this shift, the sooner we can understand the ways that the alpha can go wrong and become a power over situation as opposed to a power in service of, the better. And I think when we get it right, it helps avoid that pushback that is almost certain to come down the road if we don't get it right.
Yes.
So one way to think about this power, it can kind of go in. It can go off the rails in two ways. And if you think of this, there's a common spectrum of parenting, right? From, on the one hand, permissive, and on the other hand, authoritarian. And really, if you look at that spectrum through the lens of power, it's like authoritarian is this sort of overuse or the abuse of power, using too much of it in the wrong ways. Mm-hmm. And permissive parenting is not employing enough power. And so the key idea here is that the right amount and kind of power is not just sort of halfway between those two poles. It's a third elevated position. You have to think not of actually a spectrum, but of a triangle. And that the peak of that triangle is a skillful use of a good amount of power, this responsible, skillful application of power in service of. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think that sounds amazing. And have you described it that way before? I don't know that I've ever seen.
I have not. It just came to me.
Yeah.
As we were talking.
I know,
as we were talking.
I like it. And I want to think about, so my first question is, why is it not in the middle? Do you know? Do you have a thought on why it's not in the middle?
My thought is that if you just go in the middle, it's sort of like, and you think of it just as a slider, you're going from low power to there's you sort of need an x-axis and a y-axis. Mm-hmm. And one axis is just sort of low power and one is high power, but then the y-axis is quality. Mm-hmm. Right? You want a high quality. Now this gets away from the triangle, but if we think of 4 quadrants, if you are low on the y-axis, it's a poor quality, then maybe it's good to be low power. You want to really turn, if the signal of your radio is really garbled, maybe turn the volume down, right? But if you have great music, you want to play it loud because then everyone can enjoy it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can play kind of bad music loud, and that's one way to go wrong. Or you can just not play any music loud enough at all, and kids need the music.
Yeah, so I like it, and I think when you made it look like a triangle in my mind, two things that came to my mind.
Yeah.
And so it seems like that perhaps when we're on the bottom of the triangle and we're going from one side being permissive to the other being authoritarian, or I would say okay. So when we're along that line, in some ways it is very, let's say, parent oriented. It's like parent centric. It's sort of like what we feel more comfortable doing. Like maybe my nature might be that I'm a little bit more of a laissez-faire parent, and I just feel like I don't really want to put many boundaries in place, and it just feels uncomfortable for me. It might actually just be part of my personality that I'm like conflict averse, and so it feels kind of comfortable to parent there. And maybe I've read some books that go along that. And then maybe if I'm on the side of the authoritarian parent, it might be because either I was parented that way and I think that it's the way to parent, or it might be the more natural place for me too. I might just be like, oh, this feels good because like I got to control my kids. I have it in my head that I need to raise kids who are going to grow up to be, respectful and etc. When we go to the triangle, we sort of like you said, it's like an elevation, and it's more about, the orientation is more like seeing a bigger picture. and looking at saying like, well, what is actually best for my child? And so it might even require a person to elevate themselves a little bit out of the like their natural inclination, their natural personality inclination, I should say, because I do believe that alpha is deeply natural. So I do believe it's deeply natural underneath our personalities. There's a deep instinctive kind of like call for that.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like there's something that felt right when you described it more like a triangle, because it felt like, yes, I do need to sort of step into something. I need to like step into a place. And I think you can be a very conflict averse person and still actually step into the alpha.
For sure.
And in fact, I think if you step into the alpha, you will absolutely end up with far less conflict.
I agree.
So at the end of the day, you probably get what you want or what you feel more comfortable in. But it does requires one to kind of embody that alpha in this way that kind of takes you out of those two polar opposites and brings you into something that's just real, like almost like presence. That was the other word I got. When you went there, I felt like it was like coming into this like peak of like presence, and I'm Dalai Lama and I'm just holding, I'm like holding space for everyone, not to get too esoteric, but it feels like that's
there's definitely an element of that for sure well, I was thinking about when I'm embodying the alpha really well, really powerfully in service of kind of way with my crying 2-year-old, I'm unruffled. I'm calm. I am present, and I'm allowing her to have her feelings. I'm not trying to change. Obviously, there's a time and a place to comfort, but sometimes there's comforting is more for us than for them, because we're just going, I can't listen to you cry. You got to stop crying. And I have felt that way myself. But when I'm really in that alpha, embodying the alpha, I'm holding space. I'm like, hey, if you need to cry, you can cry, and but I'm here, and that's that. And you might not even recognize it, but as soon as you kind of get enough of your feelings out to like take a deep breath and calm down, even just to come like the littlest of bits, she's gonna go, oh, and here he is, he's still there. And that's that secure base of attachment that we talk about.
Yes. Yeah, and then you said something about being unruffled, and in some ways, right, like as soon as we turn that into something that it's not, like we start to make meaning of the baby's crying and I have to fix this, and and I can't handle this, I'm so tired, I don't want this anymore. We sort of get out of presence and we get into these stories that make us want to control the situation. And that's not what alpha is. So alpha is what you're talking about. And yeah, and there's a way that it's like a dropping in more of like, oh, this is what we're doing now. Okay, I guess this is what we're doing now. We're going to sit in crying for a little while, and not needing to change it, and yet being there to say, but when you're ready to, it's also not, it's not also like, well, when you're done crying, when you're ready to be done crying, I'll be here waiting for you. It's not that. It's sort of like, I'm with you. I'm like right here with you. And I'm the one that's saying like, we've got this. I've got this for you. You go ahead and do whatever you need to do, and I'm going to be holding everything together.
Yeah.
And
totally.
There's something different that I think in my nervous system sort of is like,
There is a big nervous system component to this, because there is like I think it's a prerequisite for embodying the alpha to have a regulated nervous system oneself. And if I'm dysregulated, I'm just not going to be as effective with my child. I mean, it's just like, it's sort of painfully obvious. I mean, whether that's with me with my 2-year-old or me with a teenager. Like if a teenager comes in stressed out and I meet that stress with stress, I'm sort of letting them set the tone on a physiological level before we even have to before the conversation even gets going. So they come in with stress. I need to come in and stay with grounded calmness and make space for that stress. So I'm not trying to change them or alter them, but I'm taking responsibility for setting that tone, because I know that teenager doesn't want to leave that session still stressed if possible. They would rather be more calm, more grounded, more relaxed. So I want to set the tone for not just for myself, but for them. And this is why it's in service of.
Yes. I'll bet you that a lot of people don't know how to regulate their nervous systems. I'll bet you a lot of people don't feel they have regulated nervous systems. I just have a lot of people who tell me that it's just hard for them when their kids are upset. It's hard for them to not get triggered by it.
Yeah.
And so I want to suggest that we have an episode to talk about nervous system regulation. I would love to talk about that. That's
it's definitely a whole episode worth of exploration.
Yeah, I think some people don't even know that we all know we have a nervous system, but we don't think about our nervous system that much. We might be in a body that has a dysregulated nervous system, and we might feel anxiety and reactivity and like a nervousness and stress, but we don't know that there are actually things we can do to regulate that nervous system. And one of the things that I've understood is that our children, they don't actually have the ability to regulate their nervous systems. And so they need to co-regulate by using us. And that, and I'd love to hear your take on this, but from what I understand, it's this way that if my nervous system is not regulated, they actually will co-regulate to my dysregulated nervous system. So they will actually kind of match up to it.
That's right.
And so the more that we do the work of regulating our nervous systems and understanding when we're dysregulated and then knowing how to engage the parasympathetic nervous system to bring us back to homeostasis, like the more we know how to do that, the better it is for our children for the long term, because they're literally developing their nervous system and their nervous system regulation by using us. So I think, yes, let's say we're going to talk about it more in depth, because I think you and I could easily have a great conversation about this. And also just acknowledging that from what you said, that the alpha, part of the alpha really is about understanding our nervous systems and understanding how our reactivity does contribute to, say, everything. Because it really does. At the if there was one body part that I think impacts our day all day long, it's our nervous system, and yet we don't learn a lot about it. And so I think that if we can the more we can learn this, imagine like our children will get the benefit. We could probably do nervous system work alone and understand the alpha, and then probably just be like change a whole generation of children, because they would, if we did it, they borrow it from us and then they get this healthier nervous system.
So we've been talking a lot about nervous system, very important stuff, obviously. But if we get back to just the concept of the alpha, there's one thing that has been super relevant for me lately. It's been up, so I'm gonna talk about it in case there's other parents out there who have young ones. And actually this carries through to lots of different ages, but it comes straight from Neufeld, and he talks about the demanding child. And there's a way in which when a child becomes demanding, they are stepping into, they're seizing the alpha, because now they're the ones sort of issuing demands, and it's not the positive alpha, but it's still the alpha. And so if we kind of go, here's the thing is oftentimes we get it kind of confounded with attending to their needs, right? Because we also talked about earlier, that one of the key principles of attachment parenting is like responsiveness. And it's not just that, but that's one source of that idea of, hey, and it is good parenting, especially in the first 9 months of life,
Yes.
is just being ultra responsive to the needs of the child. But as the child gets older, even at 1.5, 2 years old, and certainly by the time they're, preteens and teens, kids can become demanding. And Neufeld says that a demanding child can never be satiated, because what they're really wanting isn't for their demand to be fulfilled, but for the alpha position to be reclaimed
By the parent.
And so if we bend over backwards to try to meet those demands, we're just further deepening the problem, because we're proving that we're not in the alpha position by ceding to that demand.
Yes.
So that's just like I'm so present with how hard it is to resist falling into that trap right now with my 2-year-old. And also I'm seeing how drastically different the outcome is depending on if I fall prey to it or I resist it and stay, in my alpha presence. The outcomes are just like night and day different.
Are you able to pull up something that is an example of I feel like it sounds really, it makes a ton of sense, right? But then when they're in the situation,
oh my God,
if you,
yeah.
Do you have
well,
something?
I don't want to throw my 2-year-old under the bus here. Okay.
Well, it doesn't have to be about her. It could be a hypothetical, use similar.
A hypothetical identical person.
Don't worry, she's probably like most 2-year-olds. So
okay. Well, so she wakes up and is crying in the middle of the night, and she just is expressing a need. I want my baba. Okay. There's a way in which this is why it gets complicated, because there's a way in which, on the one hand, she's hungry. On the other hand, on another hand, she's just wanting some soothing, and both of those are totally legitimate. And yet, there's an element there where she's being demanding, and so it's sort of like threading a needle. It can feel like to both to actually provide what she's asking for, but not be just running around like, oh, that's what you want. Okay, let's go get it. Okay, so I want to try to help you not be so upset anymore. Here you go. Here's your bottle. Okay.
Yes.
So it's partly in how I respond to that and how I stay connected or don't stay connected to myself. So what I'll try to do, instead of just kind of going, oh, that's what she needs, and getting frantically trying to meet that demand, I will take a pause and I'll comfort her first and say, okay, sweetie, we can get a bottle. That's okay. Yeah, we can do that. Just, and I will let her come to a bit of a calm place, and then as soon as she calms down, go downstairs to get it. So so that way I'm not sort of reinforcing her being demanding, and instead I'm letting her know, both in what I'm saying and doing, that I'm here for you, and I'm going to get your needs met. You're going to get your needs met. I'm going to help facilitate that. I think maybe an even better example came 6 months ago, when we were still sort of really struggling to put her down, and she would cry every time we put her to sleep. And so this time, we'd put her down, she'd cry, then we'd sometimes pick her up and then put her down, and we fell into that trap, right? And I really didn't want to, and even though we occasionally did, put her down and just walk away. And so in this case, what I did was I held her, and she knew exactly what was about to happen. She was going down in the crib, and that was going to happen. And that sort of that's part of the alpha saying, hey, it's time for bed now, so you're going to go into the crib. It's not an option. But I also didn't want to leave her or abandon her in that moment of distress, because she really was, I think, wanting to stay connected, right? So instead of so she started issuing these demands. I want this, I want that, I want mama, I want a baba, I want this, I want that. And she I want the chair, I want to sit in the chair, right? Mm-hmm. Anything but just standing over the crib. And I didn't even say anything. I just held her, and I stayed really calm, and I just was swaying back and forth with her, and she was crying and crying and crying, and I just was like, this is happening, but I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to be with you until you kind of get through this your emotions. And it was tough, and it lasted for what felt like an eternity. I don't know how long I stood there with her. It might have been 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe it was 10 minutes of her crying. But eventually, what happened was, and this is why the theory is so helpful, is that I knew that if I hung in there and I just stayed calm and I stayed grounded and I stayed regulated and I let her have her feelings and I didn't try to rush her through them, that she would get through it. And that once she got through it, something would shift in her brain, and she would then seek her secure base, which was me, and I was right there. And that's exactly what happened. I knew it was going to happen. I believed it was going to happen, but there was still let's see if it really happens. Mm-hmm. And it is exactly what happened. She cried, and I just didn't even say anything. Like I said, I just rocked her and held her, and I was very calm, very patient. And then at some point she was like, and then finally she kind of was like, and then just nuzzled into my chest. She just put her head down and nuzzled in. And it was all those things that she was saying she wanted were like, couldn't be further from her mind. And she just nuzzled in, and she just kind of fell asleep in my arms. And then I was able to just gently, maybe while she was still sort of half asleep, half awake, put her in the crib. But I held her for a long enough time that I felt like she was also really getting filled up with some good connection, good attachment energy.
You know what? When you say that, it makes me think that I think it's just hard for humans in some ways to get through our nervous systems down to what we really want. Like even as adults, it's like, we're grasping. Like I grasp for my phone or for food or for something when I'm longing for connection. But if my nervous system is activated, then naturally, like it's going to take some time to get to the place where I can go calm my nervous system enough and then look for what I'm really craving. And in that situation, it was like you knew that what she thought she wanted wasn't what she really needed. So that's one of the other differentiations too between a demanding child. A demanding child wants things that sound like they need them. It's what they want. And if we respond to everything that they want, we sometimes miss what they needed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so what she needed was the connection. But it took time because her nervous system, maybe it was from being at school during the day or because something else happened. Her nervous system her nervous system caused her to be unavailable for that connection until she processed enough of it to come to that place. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. I haven't thought about it in that way before, but it really makes a lot of sense. And I want to echo something that Gordon Neufeld talks about, that it's not that we are necessarily providing for each of their needs so much as that we are the solution. We are what they're looking for. And you said that, but I just want to emphasize it's like literally what she was longing for was there all of that time, but she wasn't available for it yet. And then when she became available and got that need met, it really didn't matter anymore. She was there, she got that, and then I don't know, it would have been interesting if you had just like put her in shortly thereafter into her crib. I'm even curious, do we become satiated and then we're available for like disconnection. I don't really, but like separation is a better word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. That's a really good example, I think, of, and it makes me also think about the importance that I wished I had learned this younger. I was actually pretty good when my kids were really young, and then there was this period of time where I wasn't as good about this, but I really wish I understood how important it is to allow spaciousness. So I remember when the kids would be going to school, and then I would not leave enough time. And so naturally my nervous system starts getting escalated because I like being on time. And so when my nervous system is escalated, then they're, co-regulating to me, or they're co-matching my nervous system. They're dysregulating. They're co-dysregulating to me. Exactly. And then, nothing goes right. So I changed our whole schedule in the mornings, and I said we are going to have an entire half an hour of buffer. Everyone woke up a half an hour earlier. I didn't talk to them about it. They were young enough that I was able to just say, okay, we all have to get up at this time. And that spaciousness changed our entire morning. We almost every morning had time to just sit down and connect before we left for school. And it wasn't on purpose that ended up being an added benefit to it. But I guess what I'm saying is it's about taking away the pressure of time. Because that's what you did. You even said, you consciously said, I'm in this for as long as I need to be.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine was just talking to me about her son, who is a high schooler. And he was upset about something, and it was 11 o'clock at night. And she was like, ugh. Like, in her mind, she's thinking, now? Really? 11 o'clock at night? This is when we're going to do it? And what ended up happening was she very quickly said to herself, no, I'm in it. I'm in it. However long it takes, I'm in it. And it completely opened up everything. And then it became like there was spaciousness for everyone to just be with what was there instead of resisting. Oh my gosh, I need to go to bed. He needs to go to bed. He's going to have to wake up early. I have to make sure he gets to sleep. We need to end this conversation. All that inner dialogue. When that's just arguing with reality. And so a lot of this also is just not arguing with reality. Like, okay, this is where we are right now. Okay, we're dealing with crying before we go to sleep. We're dealing with a lot of demands, and that we don't necessarily have to act on them, that we know a little bit better what would be best for them. I mean, that's a slippery slope. The whole we know best can be a slippery slope.
Right. Well, if we're understanding that what you articulated it so clearly earlier, and I loved it. It's like, if we understand that ultimately what they're needing is that safe, secure connection and base of attachment. Then all those surface level demands lose their potency.
Yeah.
But I think as if we step back and kind of look at the alpha and sort of summarize what we've been talking about, it's like the alpha is the providing side of the attachment relationship. So, and what we're providing is not a bunch of little things, it's us. It's the it's the relationship, and being present and available and self-regulated. Those are some important ingredients in the mix to be available for that.
Yes.
When kids will repeatedly challenge that, right? Because there's a way in which we actually almost need it to grow into a stronger alpha ourselves. We get that when we get that challenge, and then we have to meet the challenge, and it makes us more powerful. And if we don't kind of, I'm just thinking about this as just practically, if we don't keep having that challenge occur over time, and all of a sudden we have an adolescent and then they challenge us, then we're going to get knocked over. So it can be frustrating when we get that challenge, but I think knowing that it's really necessary and healthy and normal and part of the deal can be helpful. And to understand that that the the true demands of being an alpha and of being a parent in that way, it's sort of coming not from the kid, it's coming from life itself. Mm-hmm. It's like the situation. It's coming from the situation. The situation is demanding something of us, is requiring, is calling for. It's calling for something in us, and we have the choice of whether we're going to meet that and how we're going to meet that. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely not about being perfect, but for me, the more I understand how I could possibly do that well. If you don't have if I don't have even an inkling of what it means to do it well, it's going to be very unlikely that I come close to doing it well. So just being aware of what this construct is. It's a very ancient construct. It's not just humans. It's maybe all of mammals in different ways. And so it's so fundamental, and it is instinctive, and it is universal. Understanding it is so helpful.
So helpful. Yeah.
So I want to say one last thing, and maybe, and obviously if you want to add anything, please do, but and then we can wrap up here. And that is that it is inevitable that we are going to miss the mark. Inevitable. And especially if we've never heard of the alpha, then we're just, we're going to just, our whatever parenting strategies we have been employing are either going to, align with this or not. And it's kind of like arbitrary almost. So we're all going to miss the mark in certain ways. And fortunately, that's been factored into the equation, that for a very healthy, happy, well-adjusted child, we don't have to be perfect at all, not even close. But it's more like just, I think the more we hit the mark, the better. Yeah. It's just that's how I look at it. Yeah. And if there's conflict or there are problems arising, it's just a very good place to look to see, okay, if adjustments feel like they need to be made, it's almost certainly related to this. Yeah. So it's just such a helpful construct in that way too. And maybe this is also what I'm about to say is a topic for a whole other episode, but the idea of repair, which you do a great job of talking about, but I'll just give a nod to it, and that is that whether it's with a 2-year-old or a 12-year-old or anywhere in between, or a 20-year-old or whatever, the idea that we can get off track, we can not be regulated ourselves, and then we can come back later when we are regulated, when we are more calm, when we do have more presence of mind, and say, oh, I'm so sorry I said that earlier, I did that, or that wasn't me being at my best and I want to do over. Those kinds of things really go a long way and are very helpful in just addressing when we do miss the mark, which is, like I said, obviously going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's deep connection that happens in repair. Mm. And often the person that you're repairing with feels seen, which is something we all crave. So if you didn't see them before, but then you go back and you actually spent time thinking about it, and then you came back and talked to them, it means you really mattered. And I think that those things are like super important and it's almost like you could almost say that the repair is like needing to repair has its own level of importance. And then the other piece of it is it teaches our children that when they make mistakes and they miss the mark in relationships, that they have a way to be able to navigate that they don't just have to be, oh no, I just need to hide in shame, or I just need to, pretend that didn't happen. They get to see that, oh no, like, what? the way we handle this is we go back and we talk to the person, and we, and then we try to do a little bit better next time. Yeah. That's one of the other challenges is like, sometimes we apologize a lot for the same thing over and over again. And there does need to be a commitment to self that says that, if I notice myself apologizing for the same thing over and over again, it's possible I need to do a little bit of introspection on what I could be doing proactively here. So there's a little bit of both in there, but there's no question. And along the lines of the part about that we'll miss the mark, it's also just reiterating that it's never too late. And that, all humans crave this. Like there are adults walking around right now wishing for their parents to have taken care of them. They're like looking for bosses to take care of them, and partners to look for care of them, and children to take care of them. Yeah. Because they didn't get those attachment needs met, and they're still longing. And so we know for a fact that if it's your teenager, if it's your 30-year-old, you could actually really repair the attachment by I'm not suggesting that you need to step in alpha in the same way you would with your 10-year-old, but that there's a way that you can hold that energy of like, I am still here for you. I'm like the solution. I'm the answer.
Well, and in terms of repair, part of it is taking responsibility. It's not enough to apologize, right? It's taking responsibility for one's part, for one's role. And that phrase of taking responsibility, it fits completely with the spirit of the alpha. Is like, you're the one taking responsibility for the meeting the needs, for the well-being, for caring for providing, and so it's very in line with that. And an amazing therapist and parent coach, Polly Ely, pointed out one time about repair, the importance of repair. She said, imagine right now if your parents came to you and said, "Hey, remember that time when you were 14 and that thing happened? You know what? I'm sorry." Like,
it gave me goosebumps.
Me too. And I didn't even say what the thing was. I don't know if there was a thing, but it's like, that's how real it is. So it really is never too late. And it's remarkable that that's how we're built.
That's how we're built.
So that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for being with us on this exploration of the alpha and of attachment. And if you have questions, please let us know. Please share this, like it, all the usual things. Subscribe. Yeah. And we look forward to continuing the journey.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.